Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Trump and Netanyahu to hold crunch talks on Gaza at the White House. Moldova's pro-European party has won the parliamentary election as President Sandu warns of Russian interference. Golfer Rory McIlroy speaks out over fans' abusive behaviour at the Ryder Cup after Europe's historic win. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has met with US counterpart Donald Trump at the White House. The two leaders are expected to hold crunch talks over Trump's Gaza peace plan. Ahead of the meeting, Trump seemed optimistic, posting on Truth Social, "We have a real chance for greatness in the Middle East, and we will get it done." We can now go live to Herzliya, just north of Tel Aviv, to speak to author and Middle East correspondent Yotam Confino. Yotam, great to have you on the show. OK, so we have been down this road many times before where President Trump has talked with huge optimism about a ceasefire involving Hamas and Israel, all smiles and thumbs up as he greeted Netanyahu at the White House. But is there something really substantial in this?
I would say yes, and I would say that also the atmosphere in Israel is different this time around compared to other instances where, as you mentioned, Donald Trump said that Israel and Hamas were close to a deal. This time around, it seems different. I think everyone understands how much Trump actually wants this. He's repeatedly said in the past couple of weeks that he really wants this deal to happen. And this time around, there's also a very broad, relatively specific offer on the table with 21 points. And the fact that he has Netanyahu now visiting him at the White House to discuss this, and the fact that he has the backing of several key Arab and Muslim leaders such as Turkey, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates for this plan, that tells you that this time around, it's more serious, I would say, and that there actually is a chance that we could see a ceasefire happening.
OK, so the smoke signals are positive. Benjamin Netanyahu is, of course, speaking to Donald Trump right now in the White House about this 21-point proposal you mentioned. Yotam, it's far-ranging. What more do we know about this plan, and what are the key points?
Let's start with some of the points that are specific. The plan calls, first of all, for the release of all 48 hostages within 48 hours. Hamas can play no role in Gaza in the future. Gazans will be allowed to leave the Strip if they want, but they won't be forced to leave. There has to be a de-radicalization process of Gaza. Israel won't be allowed to attack Qatar, for example. And Hamas officials who want to leave the Gaza Strip could be granted immunity and safe passage. Now, there's some of the more very specific points. There's also, of course, the fact that there will be a transitional government made up of Palestinian technocrats, which will be overseen by another international force. So there are many things in this 21-point plan. Some of the more vague points is, of course, what role should the Palestinian Authority play? Because the Palestinian Authority is mentioned in the plan. It's mentioned in relation to a reform that they need to undergo, but it doesn't say anything about whether they will actually govern Gaza. And that's something that, for Israel at least, is very important. Netanyahu, his entire government, and many other in the opposition in Israel have said they don't want the Palestinian Authority to play any role in Gaza. So there are many things that are still vague, but the more specific points, such as Israel, for example, withdrawing fully from Gaza, that's something that's very contentious, at least on the Israeli side. They're going to have to make compromises, but so will Hamas. And at the end of the day, it will be up to the Israeli government, firstly, to say if they're interested in this deal or not. And then we will see what Hamas has to say.
Yeah, and this is the big question, isn't it, Yotam? The sticking points to a deal is Benjamin Netanyahu accepting it. And we have spoken about this before. It has to look like a win for Netanyahu when it comes to Gaza. He has to keep the right of his party happy and President Trump on his side. He's got a real tightrope to walk.
It's incredibly tight, as you mentioned, and there are several points in this plan that some of his far-right ministers will simply not be able to accept. For example, fully withdrawing from Gaza, promising not to occupy Gaza. Those two things directly contradict what the government has already decided. Currently, there is a plan in place for Israel to occupy Gaza and have full security control with the enclave. That's a non-negotiable thing, I would say, for the far-right ministers. And of course, also the fact that this plan does mention a Palestinian statehood. It doesn't say that there will be established a Palestinian state, but it mentioned that there should be a process to get there. That's all something that the far-right ministers won't like. In fact, one of them, the finance minister, already said today, it's a red line, it's a no-go. My guess is Netanyahu will bring this forward to a vote in the cabinet. There will be most likely agreement on this, because Netanyahu can sell this. He can sell this to the Israeli public if he manages to get all 48 hostages out, a promise that Hamas will no longer play a role in Gaza, and of course that there will be security guarantees for Israel by other Arab nations. I think he could sell that, and I think he's willing to gamble that the far-right ministers won't topple him. If they do, there'll be, of course, called elections 3 months from the day that they actually topple him.
And I guess we have to wait to see what happens there. But let's talk a little bit about the hostages and Hamas, because over the weekend, Hamas did release a statement saying they had lost contact with 2 hostages, I think it was, since the Gaza offensive did start. And we also mentioned what is on the table for Hamas. And of course, they haven't signed on to this or agreed a deal at all.
They haven't. In fact, I spoke to a Hamas official just yesterday who said that Hamas has not received the offer. To me, that sounds a bit odd, because Qatar, which is essentially negotiating on behalf of Hamas, they're deeply involved in this. In fact, the Emir of Qatar spoke to Donald Trump just an hour ago. So I don't really buy that Hamas has not been presented this offer, but they haven't at least made a decision on that. I think that's fair to say. I think they're waiting to see if Netanyahu is going to accept this or if he's going to derail it. Qatar apparently has told the United States that they will be able to basically strong-arm Hamas into taking this deal. That's according to Sky News Arabic. So I would say Hamas, they don't have many cards left on their hands. The literally only card they have on their hands are the hostages. And that's why they're playing psychological games by saying they lost contact with 2 hostages, something they've said before during the war to put pressure on Israel and to obviously cause more damage to the families of the hostages.
And also, Yotam, what does Donald Trump want out of this meeting?
Look, he wants a deal. He wants to be able to say we're done with Gaza, because he's fed up with Gaza. He's fed up with how much time and energy he has to spend on it. He's fed up with having to constantly defend Israel. Israel is extremely isolated. The United States is basically the only country in the world that constantly supports Israel in the international system. So he's hoping that he can get at least a verbal commitment from Netanyahu that he will do everything he can to go back to his government, bring it to a vote, and have it pass. I think that's what he's expecting tonight. Netanyahu cannot go and announce a deal because it needs to be voted on. But if he gets a verbal commitment from Netanyahu, I think Donald Trump will take that.
Yotam Confino, we'll wait to see what we get out of that meeting, which is currently happening. Thank you so much for joining us. For more on this, I'm joined from London by international negotiator Nomi Bar Yaakov. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show. Nomi, reports over the weekend say Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff Jared Kushner and Benjamin Netanyahu held these talks. Is this a positive signal that back-channel negotiations are yielding the results that are needed for a deal to be reached?
Yes, thank you, Leigh-Ann, for having me on your show again. I think it's a good sign in the sense that they were working on the 21-point plan. And I think it's important that Netanyahu had a good look at it and a good discussion with them on it, them being the two chief advisors on this particular, on Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank. So I think the 21-point plan was discussed in great detail. Netanyahu had some amendments of his own to it, and those will be discussed or are being discussed currently as you and I are speaking between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I think, yes, I think it's a good sign that there is definitely active engagement. I also think that they said to Netanyahu that in no uncertain terms, he needs to sign on to whatever the president tells him to do. And Steve Witkoff had done this before. He was dispatched to see Netanyahu in Tel Aviv 2 days before Donald Trump took office in January. He did not want to sign at all the deal that was on the table, the deal that Witkoff had presented to him. And Witkoff just said, you've got no choice. Israel is existentially dependent on us, and you need to sign the dotted line. And I think the same thing is going to happen now. I think Trump is going to force Netanyahu to sign on the agreement, because Donald Trump had spoken to the Emir of Qatar just an hour ago, just as they were walking into the meeting, just before. The pressure is on. The Emir of Qatar was in New York, gave a very, very forceful address. It was very clear that Israel had crossed a red line beyond any red lines. It was a succession of red lines that Israel had crossed, but the attack on Qatar went that far that I think the Emir said, look, we've got to get this and you've got to rein Israel in. And I think that Donald Trump had understood the message. So the pressure is on from the Gulf, and Donald Trump would like to see an end of the war. So whether Netanyahu will be able to sell it to his right-wing coalition or not, he may just have to take a safety net from Yair Lapid, the leader of the opposition, had basically said, the deal has to go through, the hostages have to come back, I'll give you a safety net if the extreme elements within your government leave.
And you mentioned there that President Trump will force Netanyahu into signing this deal and taking it back to his cabinet and selling it. Is Donald Trump able to force Netanyahu into this? What leverage does he have?
Oh, he has a huge amount of leverage. Israel will not survive without his support, and so I think there's a consensus in Israel, and certainly Netanyahu knows that if President Trump isn't happy or it doesn't, with what he's doing, then he will. He basically this is the fourth meeting between Netanyahu and Trump. So in the first three meetings, Netanyahu managed to persuade Trump that whatever his narrative was, this is the case. So basically said, we've got to continue to attack Hamas, we've got to destroy them, and Trump bought into this. Now Trump had seen not only the Emir of Qatar, also Erdogan, also the president of Pakistan. He met with also the King of Jordan. They had a really serious meeting at the UN last week. And I think Trump is going to draw a line under the issue. And he's going to say to Netanyahu, I'm sorry, not the rest of the world doesn't see the matter the way you do. And I would like to see an end of the war. And I think he probably will say to him, it is not possible to destroy Hamas. He did say about 6-7 weeks ago, Donald Trump, that within 2 weeks Hamas will be destroyed and it'll be the end of the war. That's because Netanyahu in the third meeting managed to persuade Trump that that was going to be the case. That is, there's a short, quick entry into Gaza city, and that was going to be it. 1 or 2 weeks. The chief of staff says a minimum of 6 months. Others say a few years once you occupy Gaza. So I don't think Trump wants to see an Israeli occupation of Gaza. It's very clear that the Abraham Accords are at risk, not only with annexation in the West Bank, which also is a very important issue, which is going to come up today. Netanyahu had promised his cabinet that he will annex the West Bank the moment the Western states, namely France and the UK and others, Australia, Canada, would declare Palestinian statehood. It was meant to be a simultaneous move. He kept on saying time and time again, a unilateral move by them will be reciprocated by a unilateral move by Israel of annexing all of the West Bank. And then again, Trump had the leverage over Netanyahu, and he said after the meeting with the Arab leaders and Muslim leaders, and he said, no, you cannot access even 1 millimeter of the West Bank. And I don't think they will annex. Legally, they will not annex. De facto, there's a different issue. But there was a delegation of settler leaders that flew in yesterday after the Sabbath, so on Sunday, to see Netanyahu with the request that he raises with Trump the annexation issue, and that he comes out and announces an annexation. And Netanyahu refused to give them that commitment because he was told loud and clear by, I'm sure by Donald Trump himself, but also by Witkoff and Kushner, that he cannot annex. So the leverage that Trump has is 100%. And whatever Trump is going to say to Netanyahu over Gaza, that is what's going to happen.
So, Nomi, I just want to talk a little bit about something in this 21-point plan regarding Hamas, because a lot of people are saying, you know, what's in this deal for Hamas? They still hold the hostages, but they're saying that there could be a safe passage out of the enclave for Hamas members who don't commit to non-violence. Which countries would be prepared to take some Hamas militants in after?
Well, that's under discussion. Sorry, Leigh-Ann. The countries are still under discussion, and I think there'll be a fair amount of countries that support Hamas that will allow them in. The choice, that's just a slight nuance there. The choice that is in the 21-point plan, which I read very carefully, is that they will either they'll be given the option to hand in their weapons, and the weapons will be destroyed. That's a DDR process. It's a disarmament process. And if they will not want to give up their arms and have their arms destroyed, then they will be allowed to have a choice of safe passage. So, you know, in the past we've heard, you know, Turkey, Qatar, Algeria, but I'm sure there are many other countries that will also, certainly Iran, would welcome Hamas. I don't think there'll be a shortage of Muslim countries that will be willing to take them in.
And I just want to bring some breaking news to you. Coming out of that conference, reports that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu apologized to the Qatari Prime Minister in a phone call from the White House for the attack on Doha. What do you make of that?
Well, that's a very, very good example for the leverage that Donald Trump has on Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu had previously said that he'll never apologize. He took great pride in the fact that he was going to, you know, he was hunting the leaders of Hamas in Qatar, and said that he'll do it again, and said that they will not be immune from attack anywhere. So I'm sure that this is Donald Trump's agreement with the Emir of Qatar, that unless Netanyahu apologizes to him personally, they will not move forward with the ceasefire and agreement and the 21-point plan. So I'm delighted to hear that this call had taken place. And I think that is a very good sign that Trump is this time setting limits to what Netanyahu can and cannot do, unlike the previous 3 meetings. I think he's taking cue this time from the Gulf and the other leaders that Arab leaders and Muslim leaders that he met with last week at the UN.
And I'm sure we'll be getting more out of that meeting throughout the evening. But thank you so much for joining us for your analysis and thoughts. As always, great to have you on the show. Moldova's pro-European party has won the election today, giving President Mia Sandu a new majority in parliament and a stronger push towards EU membership. Sandu warned of massive Russian interference, calling the vote critical for the country's future. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned deadly Russian attacks on Kyiv over the weekend. Zelensky said his country wants to build a joint aerial defense shield with European partners to counter Russian threats. Here's more of what he had to say.
The drone wave against Poland on the night of September 10 was a test not only for Poland but for all NATO. Russian jets violated Estonia's airspace, and the new drone incidents in northern Europe are another test for NATO as a whole. Russia is testing how far it can go. It wants to shift attention away from the brutal war it countries against Ukraine. Ukraine proposes to Poland and all our partners to build a joint, truly reliable shield against Russian aerial threats. And this is possible. Ukraine can counter all types of Russian drones and missiles. And if we act together in the region, we will have enough weapons and production capacity for these. If Russia loses the ability to strike in the skies, it will be unable to continue the war.
For more on this, I'm joined by Roger Casal from Westminster Alliance for Ukraine. Roger, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Hello.
Hello. So let's start right there with what Zelensky said. He's proposing a joint air shield with allies to counter threats from Russia after a series of airspace incursions that did cause alarm on NATO's eastern flank. But is this a realistic plan, and are NATO countries even considering something like this?
Well, it's a very good idea, and we should have done it much earlier. But you asked the question, is it realistic? And I think that is really the key question. I think everybody in NATO and in Europe would want to give as much protection to Ukraine as possible, because it's clear what Vladimir Putin's intentions are, not just to wage a military campaign, but to wage a campaign against the civilian population. After all, last night a 12-year-old girl was killed in her own home, a patient and a nurse were killed in a cardiology unit in a hospital, and Vladimir Putin is intent on eradicating Ukraine and the people of Ukraine from the face of the map. So we must do as much as we can to defend them, and I think the political will is there to do so. The problem is having the capability to do it, having the resources to do it. And I think that's why it's very important that not just governments, but also members of parliament and the population, our societies, mobilise, wake up and mobilise and realise that we are going to have to step up to the plate and do much more, spend much more and do much more and commit much more to defending Ukraine. And in defending Ukraine, we are defending ourselves, because as President Zelensky also said, we have seen Russian planes flying over Estonian airspace. We have seen Russian drones flying over Poland. And let's remember, this is hybrid warfare. So we've seen Russian attempts to interfere with the election in Moldova and in elections in Europe as well. So it's time to wake up and do what we can to defend, much more to defend Ukraine, to create that defended airspace and to support Ukraine as much as we can. And in defending Ukraine, we are defending ourselves.
So, Roger, you make a really good point there that people need to be doing much more, NATO countries. But obviously, Donald Trump wanted the defence spending in NATO countries to be raised significantly. This was agreed to. But if we look at different European countries, they're facing their own crisis when it comes to the economy, when it comes to cost of living, when it comes to energy prices caused by this war between Russia and Ukraine. How realistic is it to keep on funding this machine from the European NATO countries as it does dent their budgets? And we're clearly seeing this even in the UK.
Well, we want to protect our freedoms and our democracy in Europe. If we don't have our freedoms and democracy in Europe, we don't have anything at all. So it does require more spending, and it does require the government and members of parliament, especially members of parliament, to go out to the public and to make the case. because people are facing the squeeze. People want money spent on schools and education and other things, and they may not want it spent on defence, which is why we need to make the case for it. But if we don't have peace in Europe, if we don't defend ourselves against hybrid warfare being waged by Vladimir Putin and his regime, it will undermine everything that we value. It will undermine the basis of our society. He's already trying to do that. We must not let him pass. We must defend our democracy, we must defend our societies, and we must defend the foundation of our societies on which everything else depends. So I think it is a question of making the case to the public so that the resources can be made available, so that the plan to defend Ukraine can be more realistic, not just to defend Ukraine, but defend Europe as well. We in Europe need to take the threat from Russia very seriously, and we need to prepare to defend ourselves from a war with Russia. I'm not saying that a war with Russia is going to happen tomorrow. I am saying Europe is not prepared, and that is not an acceptable situation. So I think you're right to point the finger at how realistic is it. And it is a challenge. We are a long way from being in the position in Europe where we can adequately defend ourselves and defend Ukraine. But we must get to that position, and we're a long way from it, and there's some persuasion to do of the public. And I think I want to see members of parliament stepping up and making the case and not just leaving it to governments to do so. Otherwise, we will be left too weak in the face of too serious a threat.
And I just want to talk a little bit about Ukraine. They launched dozens of drones in a deadly overnight attack on Moscow as Kyiv intensifies strikes on refineries, which we have seen a lot. What damage is this doing to Russian infrastructure and also the Kremlin's ability to own the narrative when it comes to this war with Ukraine?
Well, it's doing a lot of damage, and I think we have underestimated Ukraine's ability to ingenuity in being able to defend itself and also launch counterattacks on Russia. I mean, what we've seen as a result of, you mentioned the drone attacks on the Russian refineries, is not just shortages of fuel outside a long way from Moscow, but shortages of fuel in Moscow itself. So not only has Moscow lost 1 million young men and many young women, it is also suffering economically. And I think the population of Russia and the economy of Russia is under strain. But all that's doing is pushing Putin towards a more and more aggressive position, a more and more aggressive stance. And as I say, his intention is not just to wage a military war against Ukraine. It's not just to gain territory in Ukraine. He really wants to eradicate he doesn't believe in Ukraine's right to exist. He wants to eradicate any resistance. That means he wants to kill people in Ukraine, whether they're soldiers or civilians, who stand in the way. He wants to remove the idea of freedom from the hearts and minds of the people of Ukraine. And we cannot allow that to happen. And the borders are porous because he's waging a hybrid war, not just on the territory of Ukraine, but on the whole of the free world, and particularly Europe. So yes, it's very good that Ukraine is striking back, but it is absolutely essential that Europe does more to support Ukraine and does more to defend itself.
So, Roger, we talk a lot about Europe supporting Ukraine, but we know that this war with Russia and Ukraine's ability to fight back comes from the US. Do you think Donald Trump's stance lately, it's changed towards Ukraine, is going to help the cause when it comes to Ukraine maybe being able to defend itself better, to bring some sort of land back and win back all its land, as Donald Trump said? Because realistically, without the US, Europe can't really do much.
Well, I wish I could answer a question about what Donald Trump is going to say or do tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But my understanding of the current position is that he does accept that Ukraine needs to be in a position to defend itself, that we cannot allow Ukraine to fall. It wouldn't just be a question of Ukraine falling. It would be a question of Ukraine being eradicated from the map. We haven't seen anything like that since the end of the Second World War. And it would put Europe and the transatlantic relationship in jeopardy. Donald Trump is not the first American president to say that the Europeans need to do more to defend themselves. European leaders themselves say Europe needs to do more to defend itself. But in order for that to happen, European publics need to support that. And it's important, I make the point again, that it's not just leaders who are saying that, it's also parliamentarians and organisations like ours, Westminster Alliance for Ukraine and others, that are making the case for Europe to do more to defend ourselves. This is a hybrid warfare. It's being waged not just against Ukraine, but against Europe. And so let's get the spotlight off Donald Trump and onto Vladimir Putin where it belongs. And let's see the danger for what it is. And let's make sure that we are better prepared than we are at the moment. And of course, if America is prepared to do less, then Europe needs to be prepared to do more. And we are a long way in Europe from being in a position where we can defend ourselves against a Russian threat without American support. We will have some American support, but we cannot rely on having as much American support as we had before. Now is the moment of truth. Now is the moment where we've got to stop talking and start taking action. And European countries are doing more, but we don't have a lot of time. That needs to be accelerated. We need to see the threat for what it is. We are under attack. Russia is at war with us already, as Eliza Manningham, the former head of MI5, have said. It's already attacking our democracies. It's already undermining our infrastructure. We're already seeing cyber attacks. And as I said, and as President Zelensky said reminded us in his statement, we're seeing Russian planes overflying NATO and EU airspace. European publics need to wake up to the threat of Russia and wake up to the fact that Europe is not yet in a position to defend itself. And that situation needs to change. If we want to see peace in Europe, we've had 80 years of peace in Europe since the Second World War. If we want that to continue, we need to prepare for war. The best way to secure peace in Europe is to prepare for war, to prepare to defend ourselves from Russia. And we are not prepared. And that needs to change.
And Roger, I just want to shift gears slightly because I know that you were a former Labour MP. And of course, Labour is holding their party conference in Liverpool. And it's been going on over the weekend. Of course, we've heard from all the big names from the party. But a new poll by YouGov was just released earlier and has revealed Andy Burnham would actually beat the Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a leadership contest. Now, my question to you is, has Starmer lost control of his party after a series of blunders, and should he be replaced as Prime Minister before things get even worse?
No, I don't think he should be replaced. And Labour doesn't really have the same tradition as the Conservatives do of stabbing its own leaders in the back. I think we're 1 year into this Parliament. I think you've got to give Starmer time to do what he has set out to do and what he's promised to do. He's been dealt a very bad hand by the previous government, and he is a serious, dedicated person doing his best. He is very unpopular, but I think the response must be for the party to unite in the face of the threat from the Reform Party and Nigel Farage, and to focus on delivering better education, better health service, better transport system, more safety for the British people, and not to get distracted by a new leadership race. There are always going to be these kinds of contests. There is dissatisfaction, but I think that the question now is how Keir Starmer reacts to that. And I certainly don't think it's the moment for a Prime Minister 1 year into his term of office with such a big majority to step aside. But you see, Starmer had a big majority of seats, but he didn't have a big majority of votes. He got a bigger majority because the right-wing votes were split at the last election. He knows that his position needs to be consolidated. He knows he needs to do better. But I think he needs to be given time for the decisions he's taking and the policies that he's putting forward to really gain traction and make a difference. I don't think now is the time for a leadership contest.
Roger, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening. Now, the golfer Rory McIlroy has spoken out against the abuse he received during the Ryder Cup after Europe secured a historic win in New York against the USA. He said he thinks golf should be held to a higher standard after some supporters behaved badly towards European players at the event. For more on this, I'm joined by the sports journalist and editor Mark Lomas. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. So, let's talk about it. A historic win for Europe. That cannot be underestimated. But, you know, Rory McIlroy was pretty honest in his press conference. He said it was a rough week. So much abuse was aimed at him and at the European players. What went so wrong with the US fans?
Now, I think we need to establish first that in the US, when the Ryder Cup is played, it is always combative. Okay, so I think the European players know that they're going into the lion's den every time they compete in a Ryder Cup on American soil. However, this time things just escalated a little bit beyond the realm of banter, I would say, which is what we're used to. You know, there was personal abuse hurled at the players. Some quite vulgar things were said, very provocative, so much so that some of the players, you know, responded, which is unusual, very unusual on the golf course to see someone like Rory McIlroy actually, you know, respond to fans because of what they're saying. His wife, Erica, was hit with a drink on the Saturday as well. So, yeah, it just was, it's always combative, but it just seemed to kind of step over the line this time. We're used to seeing a little bit more etiquette, I think, on the golf course than what we saw this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's talk about the game and the ending, because the emotion shown by Shane Lowry when he held that putt to retain the cup gave me goosebumps, and I'm sure you too and everyone watching. But what does this mean to the European players to have won the Ryder Cup, retained it, but in America?
Yeah, it definitely gave me goosebumps as well. It was an incredible moment, absolute nerveless putts from Shane Lowry at the last. But yeah, it's a huge win. You know, it's very rare that Europe win on American soil. This is only the 5th time since 1979. It's the first time since 2012. And I think it says a lot because, you know, Shane Lowry, he's an extremely successful golfer. He's won the Open, you know, he's won a major, he's won a lot of tournaments. And yet, you know, he repeated over and over again that this was the highlight, if you like, of his career. You know, golf is a very individualistic sport. And I think, you know, this time every 2 years where they can come together and they have this camaraderie, and particularly the European team have built an incredible camaraderie over these last 2 Ryder Cups. And that was on full display this weekend. And that was a big part of the reason why Europe took home the trophy.
Can I tell you what, if you talk about being united, I thought the celebrations at the end were pretty phenomenal. You know, we saw them singing loads of songs. They even asked Donald Trump, are you watching? Like almost taunting him. And Donald Trump did reply, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He said, yes, he was watching, and he offered a congratulations, actually. It was a very humble response from Donald Trump.
So let's talk about the USA, because they equaled the best performance ever in the singles. But, you know, Mark, they were still not able to win. What went so wrong with the USA team? I mean, we saw them pull back on the last day, but, I mean, the days before that was pretty dismal stuff.
Yeah, I mean, some people actually look a little bit further back than that, because in Europe have Luke Donald as their captain, another successful Donald. They have Luke Donald as their captain, and he's been in place since last Ryder Cup. He's a non-playing professional golfer now, so his full focus was on creating this team, creating this camaraderie, creating these amazing pairings for the Ryder Cup. Keegan Bradley is still a playing professional. You know, he's still going out there every week on tour. There's a bit of a kind of suggestion that he hasn't been able to give the role as much time as Luke Donald has. Ultimately, we saw that in the way that the Americans performed in the pairings. You know, they didn't dovetail well. The pairings didn't work together. And as you said, you know, really the Ryder Cup was lost in those first 2 days. When you're losing by that kind of margin, 11.5 to 4.5 after 2 days, you can't expect to then go out there on the Sunday and win the Ryder Cup. So the big players just weren't performing. Scottie Scheffler, world #1, you know, only getting 1 point from his 5 matches. Bryson DeChambeau, the talisman, all-action talisman of this American team, 1.5 points from 5 matches. You need those big players to be playing their best in order to win the Ryder Cup, and they just weren't there.
Mark, I've got 30 seconds for you. I can see a golf club in the background. Was that just a prop, or are you a keen golfer yourself? And last night was a great win for you.
Both things. Yeah, no, I'm a keen golfer myself as well. So I was absolutely glued to the action. It was incredible. And again, you know, repeating and building on that success of last time is a huge thing, and it'd be very interesting to see if Luke Donald remains the European captain and goes for a third time. No one has won it on the European side 3 times in a row as captain, so it could be Luke Donald first.
Great. We'll get you back on when that happens. Mark Lomas, thank you so much for joining us. A reminder of our top stories. Trump and Netanyahu hold crunch talks on Gaza at the White House. Moldova's pro-European party has won the parliamentary election as President Sandu warns of Russian interference. Golfer Rory McIlroy speaks out over fans' abusive behaviour at the Ryder Cup after Europe's historic win. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. The Rail deal is coming up next. Plus, of course, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.